We will have the conversations that few are prepared to have, and more importantly, conversations centered on rationality. Subscribe now to listen to Rational Voices with Sunil. Alex, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. For those who don't know, you hit national news in the spring of 2021 when you were the first medically confirmed living person in the UK to suffer a side effect of the AstraZeneca jab. You're the first living person in the UK to be acknowledged by the government. I mean, before we even go into all of that, which is crazy to think about what happened, let's take it back all the way where this all started. And I've read pieces about you and I've listened to some of the stuff many of our listeners won't have. How did this all start, and what was your background before we talk about COVID, if you like?
Well, if we go back to 2020, when the world changed for everyone on the planet, one way or another, I'm a scaffolder, or I was a scaffolder. So I was working outside, and yeah, so I was part of the first lockdown, for want of a better word. And like, if I'm honest, like everyone else, it was fantastic weather. We enjoyed the break from work. We thought, this is going to be good. We'll take this as it comes. And then they let us loose again. And then as a scaffolder, we were classed as essential workers for some reason. So we were back to work during the second lockdown. And I travelled motorways from Glasgow to more or less Edinburgh that were empty because we were classed as essential workers. And we look at all the 24/7 in every media platform that was possible, including overhead gantries telling us do the right thing, protect the NHS, save lives. And then we get to 2021, I got my letter to go and get my COVID vaccine. I didn't know anything about anything at that time, to be perfectly honest with you. We basically just coming out the grieving process, or some of the grieving of losing my mum. So wasn't really aware what was going on with regards to anything. The nearest I got to conspiracy theory was watching UFO videos on YouTube. That was my sum total of being a conspiracist. I was just interested in my music. That was my passion. I used to be in a band, and I love old-fashioned Vespas. I'm an old-fashioned mod. I've been like that since I was about 13, but at 17, it became a way of life for me. And that was about trying to be the best possible version of me that I can be at all times. That's what, to me, being a mod, the old sort of original meaning of it. And I set kind of the standards and morals, the ethics and the principles of the type of man I wanted to be when I was older. And I think at 56, I got to that place. As I say, music has been my passion since I was 13. I've always loved live music. And I've been in various sort of ensembles and bands and things, but for a couple of years I was in a band in the scooter scene, which was phenomenal for me because most of these guys are your mates. So you're playing music you love, and hopefully you're doing it well enough that they enjoy it. Because I certainly enjoyed it. So I did all that. So I'd kind of achieved most of my bucket list. And anyway, and I was quite happy and content in my life being Alec the Mod. And like everyone else before me, many that haven't, when I got the letter through to go on the Saturday, the 20th of March, 2021, to get my COVID vaccine, I went along thinking I was doing the right thing. I had no underlying health conditions, so I knew that this wasn't going to really affect me. But the story they were telling us we were going to kill Granny. And I just effectively lost my daughter's granny, my mum. And I didn't want any family to risk. Not she didn't pass away due to COVID, but it was very prevalent at the time. So you didn't want that responsibility on your own. So I thought I was doing the right thing. Went got turns out to be AstraZeneca vaccine on the 20th of March, and I was verbally told, and I do mean verbally, you may have a sore sight arm for 48 hours and cold and flu-like symptoms. That was it. No leaflet. away I went, and everything was fine till the 1st of April. I lifted something, that typical scaffolder, lift something pretty heavy. It becomes a personal thing. So I lifted this and put it into place. It should take two people. And when I stepped back, I thought I'd pulled both calf muscles. That's the only way I can explain it. Soldiered on, and I do mean struggled to soldier on for the next 2 days. Then on the 4th of April, I collapsed. I was just going to meet my daughter, and I'm an old mod, so I iron my own shirts my way, my trousers my way. It's just, that's the thing about me. I like to go out very smart. So, and I won't let anybody do it for me. So I finished ironing my clothes and turned around, unplugged the iron, and my legs just gave me, just
Wow.
collapsed like jelly. And I knew then something serious. This was serious. Don't know why. Something inside me told you, you need to stay calm. You need to stay calm. Some inner voice. And unfortunately, I had to kind of pull myself down the stairs, head first backwards, making quite a bit of noise. And my wife came out. And again, there's this voice inside me screaming, stay calm.
Yeah.
And I says to my wife, phone an ambulance and get me a belt. Because at that time I could feel something throbbing really odd, really horrific painfully in my left leg. And I still don't know, I don't know why I got the belt, the old tourniquet, too many war movies as a child, too many Western films, putting a tourniquet on it and the doctors will make sure you're okay. I don't know why, but anyway. And I don't remember much after that. And I've been obviously blue lighted to hospital. And there's a lady in front of me, and I can only see her eyes. Everything's head to toe. And she said, we need a CT scan, we need your permission. And I can remember being conscious and giving my signature. And the next thing, the CT scan's still spinning, and the same doctor is standing beside me. And she said, we need to go to theatre, and we need to go now. And all I could say to her was, I take it I'm in trouble here. And she went, yeah. I said, how bad? She said, the worst kind. And away she went. So I phoned my wife, my two daughters, and basically said goodbye to them. Unknown to me, they were actually in a room less than 50 yards away, being told by the same doctor that's just told me that there is no hope. We've got no real hope of your husband surviving. If he does, it's probably without both legs, but we don't know what it is at this moment.
Mm.
And I was rushed to theatre, and I spent 7.5 hours in surgery having clots removed. And I do mean clots, multiple, from my lower abdomen, my left leg, and my right leg for 7.5 hours. And when I've come round, the same wee lady is standing at the end of my bed, and she said, you shouldn't be here. You really shouldn't be here. But we're glad you are, and we hope you stay. And basically explained to me that, they were taking clots out simultaneously from both legs at the same time. And if they were taking two out, four were forming. They didn't really, at that time, there was no understanding of, full understanding of what was actually happening.
Right.
And she said, look, we're happy with your right leg and your lower abdomen, but there's a concern over your left leg. Within 15 minutes, that concern went from to there will be an amputation. But they couldn't amputate at that point because I'd just come through a 7.5 hour surgery that they didn't expect me to survive in the first place.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have survived. And been straight into an amputation, I wouldn't have survived that. I spent a week in isolation, basically being drip fed huge doses of morphine to try and manage the pain, which was more than words I'll ever have to fully describe. My pain levels went to 19, which is the closest to insanity I've ever came. A week later, I was taken in, and I still hung on to hope that it would be a below the knee amputation. Me being pragmatic or whatever you want to call it, I just try and think, what do we do here? How do we work ahead? I had in my head that this is, yeah, I'm going to lose the lower part of my leg. I'm still alive. I'll be able to go back to work in 6 months. That's the rationale that was in my head. So I had everything sort of built on this really impossible slim chance that it would be an above the knee amputation. And unfortunately, I went in and I knew I was in theatre longer than I should have been
Right.
because the vascular surgeon that ultimately amputated me was very clear on what if it was an above the knee, how long the operation would be, how and if it's same and there's a time difference. If it's a below the knee, it's longer because there's more nerve ends down at the bottom of the foot for them to work round. Um, so when I came round again on that would be the 11th of April, so a week later, basically, effectively, um, I came round with basically my bed hitting the theatre doors. That kind of brought me out of the anaesthesia. And obviously, the first thing I've done when I've lifted to see if this is a below the knee, because I've got in my head that things are going to be okay. And unfortunately, it was an above the knee. That's probably, and I say this a couple of times, the darkest moment I've ever had because I had so much pinned on this being it something it wasn't. But I knew that in the week of isolation, I spent a lot of time, even though I was in pain, contemplating which at that time we still didn't really know 100% why this had happened. They
Yeah.
just knew that it had happened at that point. And, so why did this happen? And how am I going to try and deal with my life? This has just destroyed everything that you knew. Because the reality is that only another amputee can possibly understand this. You've got no idea how difficult it is just to be minus a limb, especially a lower limb, if you're used to being mobile and walking, because nothing is the same anymore.
It's absolutely shocking, and I suppose when this happens, when you realize the extent of how bad things are, at that point, did you have any idea of why this has happened? Was there anything going through your head in terms of trying to maybe make sense of everything? Were you able to think of anything?
No, but basically, in the week that I spent in isolation from them, I wasn't allowed to see family or anyone. I couldn't see my wife and my children. It was only people dressed in full safety PPE because COVID was still a thing at this time. But they questioned my whole life, for going back the last previous sort of a 6 weeks. And the only difference in my life at that point, because I've got no underlying health conditions, so they're looking at what's happened recently. And that was the only thing that had happened is that I got a COVID vaccine. Um, between the 11th of April and the 19th of April, when I finally left the hospital, that week was a 70. I think this is vaccine related to it was more looking like it, and they did more and more tests, and that went on during all that time, and I think it was like 3, 4 days before I left the hospital, it was verbally confirmed that this was this condition called VIT, which
Right.
is vaccine-induced immune thrombosis thrombopenia. Don't ask me to spell it. It took me 3 weeks to learn how to say it. And so therefore it was caused by the AstraZeneca vaccine. That's kind of what was in my notes. It wasn't called VIT at that time. It was basically they weren't naming it, but that was the kind of it was a vaccine induced, and that became VIT. And I left hospital on the 19th, being told in many ways because I was the first in the world to survive with the level of this thing that they'd found, and that they didn't know anything about it. They'd
Right.
never seen this before. That was what the vascular surgeon who basically spent the 7.5 hours removing the clots She said that, but she said, we've never seen anything like this before. We've never dealt with anything like this before. And I think she had the foresight, I'm going to say, of the intelligence, the experience, to say, I've never seen anything like this before, and go upstairs to the haematology. And by coincidence, or whatever you want to call it, the hospital that I'd been admitted to was part of, they've got a haematology team there that are part of the Universe Global Haematology Task Force, who were sort of pulled together to look at these kind of unusual blood things that we now know had been happening previously and had been since these things were bloody started. And I was left hospital and we told I was the only one. And within 2 weeks, I found out through the yellow card system, because I didn't know what that was. My vascular surgeon explained what that was, so that gave me an idea where to go and look. I found another 200, at that point 235, and there was fatalities in that. And that kind of so you know what? If I'm not, I can't get access to these people through the Data Protection Act. You can't. So the only way to try and find each other was through social media. So I took to Facebook and Twitter at that point before it became X, basically trying to find other people like me. The other 200, well, we're now at 445 hits with 81 fatalities accredited to it. And I've not found all of them because we're still so heavily censored, silenced, labelled, and suppressed. You know, to be called a conspiracy theorist for something that you have got more evidence than most human beings will ever need to prove that this is what happened to me. You know, so yeah, and along the way, I realised very quickly that this fight, 'cause it is a fight, it's just for proper help and support has been going on in so many ways for so many families through medical products over the last 50, 60 years. And that's probably part of what, you know, and I say I never set out to be on the streets of London, outside the BBC, on the streets of Glasgow, on the TV, you know, in documentaries. And the last place I want to be in many ways is public because of what's happened to me. But I didn't, as I say, I only set out to find other people like me so as that we could try and support each other. And, you know, I've met some incredible human beings in the last 4 years who keep me going at times. You know, and when I knew early that the, the pushback was instant and brutal on social media, and every post I put out on Facebook was labelled as medical misinformation. You know, going, hold on a minute. You're arguing with the world's leading haematologist who have told me, they came and told me that I'm this condition called VIT, you
Yeah.
know, which is a bloodborne condition that's only ever happened by two products at that time. And that was the Johnson Johnson COVID vaccine and the AstraZeneca, which were on the RNA technology as opposed to the mRNA.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm like, so you're basically arguing with the top people in this field in the world because you're saying I'm medical misinformation. These people have told me what's wrong with me. The
Yeah.
UK government, as you said, I'm the first living person to be awarded the vaccine damage payment scheme for a COVID vaccine. It's a horrific one-off £120,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but I've lost more than that in salary alone in the last 4 years. And all it did at that point was help me save my home. I didn't have to lose my home because you go from earning what I was earning to not earning, and you're on benefits. Yeah, I'm on advanced disabled benefits, but there's still benefits that I never bought into,
Yeah.
you know. And to be told that the only other fallback that they have in the UK is the UK's vaccine damage payment scheme, which, as I say, I was the first. And you're like, hold on, they have rejected in history 98.7% of all claims historically.
Wow.
What gets worse? They've rejected over 99.99% of all COVID claims.
Wow, wow.
So that's not a fallback system for anyone that's been hurt by. I'm now at medical product, because if I go back the last 4 years, I've went from it's 100% safe and effective to it's safe and effective to it's effective to no, it doesn't stop you from catching it and it doesn't stop you from giving it. I'm way beyond any of that.
Yeah.
For me, as I say, I didn't set out to be here, and nobody would want to be known for being me, for want of a better word. Who would?
No, but
Um,
I think it's really important that your story is heard and told because, like you just said, what's so scary is there's so many people who are they're not going through the exact same thing, but have had implications from the vaccine and they've received no support or they've probably been shut down as a conspiracy theorist or whatever. So it's so important to get your voice and your story out there. I mean, have you been able to connect with many people who've had um, damages from the COVID vaccine? And is it a lot more than the average person realizes?
it's it's horrific the number of people I know that's been injured across global. This is not just a UK problem. I've got contacts with people who have been vaccine injured or they're suffering the loss of losing a loved one to a vaccine all across from Australia to Japan to America to Brazil to Spain, Italy, Belgium, Germany, the UK, Glasgow, Scotland, England, Ireland, Jersey. There's not a country in this world that's not been affected by these vaccines because they did this on a global scale. And the fact that they're not producing the true numbers now anymore, you've got to ask them any information through a Freedom of Information Act request. And you've got to be very careful how you word that because it gives them any opportunity to send you back a blank redacted page that's no use to anyone. But we're managing to get that. You stopped reporting on this 2 years ago. Why, given all that, and especially now, given evidence that's coming out about that the mRNA technology now is the problem because RNA, as I say, with Johnson Johnson and AstraZeneca being off the market globally, for me personally, that's the hugest win I can get. Whether they say it's because of competitors being better, and whether I believe that's another story, because I think they knew every other country banned it. So it was starting to go that way. They're off the market. So the fight's now to stop this other crazy technology that's never been tried in human beings before and should never ever be allowed to be used ever again. You know, that's the mRNA. And I just find that the censorship, the silence, the labelling, you know, I'd mentioned earlier I was in a band and I've always been into music. Every musician will tell you they'd love to hit the cover of the Rolling Stone. Well, I got to the front page of the Rolling Stone magazine. Unfortunately, it was me in my wheelchair outside the BBC in London telling people what had happened to me. And they labelled me as an anti-vaxxer, a conspiracy theorist. That kind of level of censorship and abuse to people like, not, and I'm not the only one, but people like me who you can't deny medically, you can't refute medically, scientifically, and you can't dispute us, you know, and
It's,
yet we're faced with this kind of backlash, you
it's
know.
absolutely, yeah, absurd. And I think that a lot of them are just, what I don't understand is maybe because they defended it so much, they're too scared to actually reflect on it. But I think a lot of people would have a lot more respect for whether it's the government, media, whoever, if they held their hands up and said, you know what, I think we got some of this stuff wrong, and you know what, let's actually really revisit this seriously because yeah, we made some serious mistakes. Of course, it's not enough to just say that, but I think it'd be a good step in the right direction. But it just seems, it'd be good to get your take on this. It just seems like they're just doubling down on what we now know for a fact that there were clear lies sold to
I think
the whole
you're
country.
just the latest scandal involving governments and politicians and big industry, whether it be pharmaceutical tech, whatever. We're the unknown, unspoken about victims of their greed for whatever their outcome they thought it was. I'm not here to say you go and take a vaccine or you don't dare take a vaccine. That's democracy, your choice. You've got your beliefs in them. I've got my proof in that they're not the safe and effective be all and end all that they're telling us all. And I think that's what this comes down to. The fact that you're right, it's very people like the government, and that's across the world, coerced, forced lots of people, mind psychological manipulation into thinking we need to do this, we need to do this, when they weren't following the science, they were following politics. And if I, I'm never going to fix this for me. Nothing's going to give me my left leg back, and the other issues that I've got that are ongoing. This. I think what people see, and I've kind of went sideways, is that they see that the amputation and think that's the problem. The amputation is a side effect of what this has done to my body. So if it's blood and it's in my blood, then it's safe to say, given, I found out 2 weeks ago that if there's some serious issues with the right leg, there's not enough circulation down there because a lot of the bloodways have been destroyed when this presented in my calf muscle. So it's not a surprise. But so when you're looking at that kind of fight and you're taking all that on board, would you think about vaccines? And would I say, I'm not here to tell you what to do because they'll tell you that they're safe and effective within a safe range that they think's an acceptable range.
Yeah,
That's for other people to argue. My argument is that if you've got medical products, irrespective of whether a vaccine or a surgical aid or anything that harms anyone at the present, and you've admitted that no medical product's 100% safe for everyone,
yeah,
then you've knowingly, for the last 50, 60 years, seen people like me, the bereaved from the COVID vaccines, being ignored and abandoned by the very people that's supposed to be there to protect them. And that you look at the way the pharmaceutical companies have responded. Because I'm in the legal case against AstraZeneca, I've got to be careful what I say. But uh, they knew in April, May 21, and they knew well before that there was a problem with these. I know they can tell you that they knew from April because I told them, you
yeah,
know. So it's not as if they say we didn't know. And I'm at the stage where you've known me. It doesn't matter which pharmaceutical company it is or what drug it is, what medical product. The fact that you've acknowledged that the only thing in place for people when it goes wrong is basic benefits, because that's what it is. It's adult disability allowance. It's still a basic benefit. And this system from 1979 that's rejecting overall majority of all claims. That's not a backup system. That's not a failsafe. That's not protecting of the public. That's not what we voted for.
yeah,
And until they change that, I'm not going to go away because it's for me. You can't now get away from the moral injustice that you have caused people for me and thousands of others globally. Yeah, I know people all around the world. I've lost people all around the world. We've lost now over 20 who had just taken too much, and I don't judge them for it.
yeah.
We've lost others who have succumbed to their various illnesses. And obviously we've lost many too instantly to the, to the results of the COVID vaccine that are now, I now know their fathers, their mothers, their wives, their children. They're, these people we have to remember that we're ordinary human beings who try to do the right thing, and we've been literally abandoned, ignored, suppressed, silenced by the very people, as we say, that asked us to do the right thing. Yeah.
I mean, I have no doubt the likes of AstraZeneca and others knew about the effects. I just think they just didn't care. I don't think they sat there and really had the empathy or cared about the consequences. And it's, that was such a horrible period. And I think it's so important not to forget what happened only 4, 5 years ago so that history doesn't repeat itself. But I think what's really sad about this example is, the way the vaccine was treated as if you were vilified if you showed any kind of contempt towards it. If you said, I'm not sure if I want to take it or not, you're like basically crucified for saying that. We were almost, there was a period where neighbors were, letting the police know like, about social distancing, all this sort of stuff, really turning us all almost against each other. And then all along, clearly these companies and the government knew that there were clear side effects. They knew the effectiveness wasn't quite as strong as what they were saying. So many of these lies have come out, and it's sad that now, even after everything that you've gone through, you still have people who doubt your story and the effects. How can, I mean, I suppose what I'm trying to get at is how do you show people or explain to people that you're not an anti-vaxxer, you're not a conspiracy. Like, how do you? Because after everything you've gone through, sure, if they can't understand it now, then surely they never will. Because I don't understand for somebody like you how anyone else can really have any doubts.
Where I am, I suppose, is that I look at what there were people out there. Was there people out there trying to tell people their thoughts or points of view on this? Yes, there was. You know, have I taken an abuse level that shouldn't be going to anyone? Yeah, me and thousands of other vaccine injured and bereaved who were just trying to tell people this happened. My son, my daughter, my wife, my child was fine and healthy. I have a death certificate that shows that this was caused by this product, and they'll be paid out, and nobody wants to acknowledge this and recognise this. And I've seen the way that we've been trolled. Some of the abuse was way too engineered. Getting plagued by bots, getting attacked by certain, and a crew that runs about on social media that think you know, they've got connections to the government and things like that. We know all about all these people, and we've been subjected to hell, the same as those people that stood up at the beginning and said there's a problem. And anyone that stood their ground all the way through this, I've got huge respect for. Whether they decided to to be vocal in public and say no, these are wrong, or whether by saying no, I'm not taking one. Because now, I mean, we shouldn't be calling them vaccines anymore because they're not. But the government insists in using this word that they changed the definition of to call these vaccines, but they're not. They're injections, and they were a novel technology that should never have been used in the human race. They've known for 20 odd years, particularly with the RNA technology, that it was causing massive clotting issues because all the trials showed it. And that's for reports going back to 2006, and that's AstraZeneca's own reports. Pfizer's paperwork, well, it took them, they wanted to hide their dump of paper for 75 years. And thankfully, someone saw sense and let these be public. And we can all I don't need to go through any examples of what's in there. It's very damning in its own right. The fact that there's 9,000 adverse reactions of special interest and just in the Pfizer one alone. You know, so what are you doing? You did it deliberately. Why? I, I, I really don't go there because I can't get to the why because still at the you did this and you are walking away. If I need to deal with that first.
Yeah.
You need to acknowledge that I exist before I can deal with the why he did it. You know, I'm at stage where we're way beyond who took these things, who didn't take them, who refused them, who didn't refuse them. We're now at the stage where all of the test injections are causing deaths and harms, and some of them are absolutely horrific, and you're not acknowledging it. That's where we have to stop. Let's do that first. Let's stop these things and then properly help and support those people who you've, like me, you've labelled, ignored, abused, censored, deleted. Let's try and help the way you should have done.
Yeah.
You know, I, I'm under no illusion. Am I saying every medical product's not safe? No,
Yep.
that's just not the argument here. It goes back to you telling us that no medical product's 100% safe for everyone. And the fact that you've got no fallback support system package, whether it be financial to look after these people for the rest of their lives, there is where we have to change. And that way, if you decide you want to go and get any medical product, whether it be a vaccine or any other product, you know that should anything go wrong, your family's got a chance of being looked after. This current system is the opposite. It seems to protect the government and the pharmaceutical industry, and it doesn't do one thing. And I'm not going to lie to you, the process I going through it is absolutely horrific
I mean, definitely
because,
the
you know,
it's.
the admin side of going through the vaccine damage payment schemes an absolute hellhole.
I
You
can only
know,
imagine because I saw just I think it was middle of last year where the EU acknowledged that the vaccine wasn't as effective in stopping transmission around last year in the summertime, and that story got about 30 seconds on BBC News. There wasn't even an article on BBC News about it. And you're sitting there thinking, we were all told to get this jab. One of the main reasons, like you said at the start of this show, that one of the reasons you felt pressured to take this jab, not necessarily for yourself, but for other people. That was one of the things. And so you've almost coerced people into taking a vaccine. One of the main reasons was to stop it from transition, but knowingly you knew that that wasn't the case, and that got about 30 seconds of airtime on BBC. That should be front page of every newspaper. It should be front page of BBC. It should be there, and it should be, everyone up in arms, being like, "What the hell has just happened here?" But no one seems to be interested in reporting. And your story, I know you probably got coverage in 2020, 2021, but it's shameful that it's still not talked about now, as they still are pushing more and more vaccines onto people. Why do you think they are they are afraid of people like yourself, or why are they not highlighting what happened in your experience and many other people's experience? Why are they just basically just shut you guys off?
I'd love to know the answer to that one, because then maybe we would get somewhere. But the fact is that there's been maybe a handful of politicians, and I'm talking across all parliaments in the UK, that have been supportive of anyone that's been vaccine injured or bereaved. And the ones that have had their share of harassment, for want of a better word, for supporting people like us. Um, and, it's frustrating that we're the ones that, if I say anything, I've got to show you the medical evidence and what lawyer said it and all the rest of it, verify it, otherwise somebody will come after me for something, we know the game. But these people can come out and make statements like safe and effective, 100% safe and effective, do the right thing, and have no consequences. And I think that has to change. I'm fully aware, as I said, I'm not here to take on the pharmaceutical industry and shut them down. I'm not saying every medical product should be banned or shouldn't be taken. I think you should know the full risk of what the protection you're going to get. That's where I am. If you want to go and get every COVID vaccine that ever comes out, that's entirely your right as a human being. Irrespective of what I think, you're entitled to that. That's democracy.
Yep.
And you've got to be able to see it for what, across both sides. If you want to go and take them, that's fine. But I'm here to show you what happens when it goes wrong. And you've got no idea how wrong it can go. And I wouldn't wish this on another human being. So I would say, have a good think about, look at the data, proper data, do your research. If you still decide to go ahead, then that's your decision. Me, I'll walk away thinking, God help you. Because you're going to need, if it does go wrong, you're in for a world that you cannot begin to imagine.
Yeah.
On so many levels, it's not just the personal level and not being able to walk again. You've lost your leg. You nearly lost your other leg, and it's not great. Sight's damage and all the other shit that's going on. You sit and think, I've just got to try and keep going through this because you people have to listen. You can't do this to people like us, destroy our lives and then think it's okay to walk away. That's what I am. And I think the Scottish government are a bigger embarrassment because they just say to you, or deal with England, they'll want to talk to you. And I'm kind of now aware there's so many people like me. There's so many of our stories coming out now,
Yeah.
which I'm ecstatic to see. And I know that may not be the right word, but it's taken 4 years of trying to get other people's stories about because I say, I can't fix this for me. But I can try and make sure that if it happens to anybody else, there is some sort of support mechanism in place. And if anybody has changed their mind or did something positive because of anything I've ever said, I'll take that as a bonus. It's about trying to set this right for the future. I don't want your children, your grandchildren, to face what we're going through. And that's the reality is that somebody's family somewhere is going to have a situation like I'm going through, or they've lost a loved one through a medical product. So we're not taking, we went from being called rare, extremely rare. And I always said, I'm not rare. I exist. I'm a human being. The fact that I exist and you're refusing to acknowledge that, despite, being medically certified and government acknowledged, then you're kind of telling me you're part of the problem. Like people like me face now, trying to get that proper help and support. And, and you say the numbers in the UK are frightening.
Yep.
People think there's only a couple of thousand. It's way, way beyond that. Way, way beyond that. Just going by even those that have applied to the vaccine damage payment scheme. If we use those numbers as a rough idea of just, and this is people that, most people don't know what the vaccine damage payment scheme is. They don't know how to get to it. They don't know much about it because it's not advertised for some reason. You're not told that, and it's so restrictive. You've got to prove it was most likely caused by whatever you're saying caused it medically.
Yeah.
And you have to prove you're 60% disabled. Now, the fact that since COVID started in January 2020, roughly, because we shut down in March 2020 and then we went through, Up until for 1979, when the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme was formed, to 2020, so December 2019, December 2019, no more than 6,485 people had ever applied to the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme. So for all those years, it was 4,000, 6,485 or something like that. From January 2021 till now, or over 20,000 people
Wow,
have
wow.
applied to the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme just for a COVID vaccine. Now that's those that are saying, I believe this vaccine harmed me. I also believe this vaccine has disabled me by up to at least 60%. How many thousands of them are there that think they're below 60%? Because nobody wants to acknowledge that they're that disabled. So we
Yeah,
play it down. And given that if we go by the yellow card reports, we know that it's only, and this is and being very conservative, reported up to 10%, but most people think it's around about 3 to 5% that people actually go to the full road and put something of this is what happened, whether it be an illness
yeah.
or whatever they feel, to a, a medical product. So what is the true numbers?
Yeah, and I think the good point with the numbers is also there'll be a lot of people who have illnesses and have picked up things, and they won't think for a second it's because of the jab, because they've been drummed in by the media and drummed in by governments that there was safe and effective, and there's no way that there were any serious side effects. So there'll be a lot of people with issues that won't even think to have the capacity to think, oh, maybe this was because of the jab I took a couple of years ago, or maybe that's because of whatever. So I think there'll be a lot of people who also who have these symptoms and have these issues, but they're not going to maybe connect the dots and think that they could do, and they'll be scared as well to say to your partner, your wife, your husband, your friend, to say, oh, I think I'm actually partially a bit disabled. I've got some illnesses, and I think it's because of the COVID jab. You can almost guarantee a lot of people would probably shut that down straight off the bat and say, no, you're being crazy. It must be something else. So I'm sure there's a
Yeah,
lot more people than those figures suggest that have this that have vaccine
I'm
based.
certainly aware that there's people out there suffering in silence
Yeah,
and don't want to go public because they've looked at people like me who went public and looked at the way they've been treated and thought, you know what, I'm just going to try and deal with this on my own. And I think that's one of the biggest sad bits for me, because I don't want anyone to ever think that they're going through this alone, because it's not something that you would wish for anyone, even your worst enemy,
yeah,
to go through something like this alone. Um, which I felt, for about the first 9 months, that's what it felt like. I was standing on the edge of a cliff in a raging storm, screaming into a wind, and nobody was listening. I know, so I'm not alone. As I say, there's now hundreds of thousands. Possibly, if we really went honest, it's probably in the millions globally that's been impacted by these. I may be biased in my opinion, but I think this is the biggest medical scandal in the history of humanity.
I agree.
And I don't think we'll know for decades the scale of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think more it will be something that we'll definitely find out more and more. I mean, Andrew Bridgeton, we've had him on our podcast before on here, and he's obviously spoken out a lot about the vaccines, and ultimately, you could argue that cost him his pretty much his career in politics. And he's saying similar things in terms of the scale and the magnitude of this is really, it's hard for people to understand how big a scale it is to coerce so many people into taking this jab. Um, I mean, what are some of the takeaways from this? If you are somebody watching this, and you think you are related, you think you may have a COVID or a general vaccine related injury, what are some of the if you like the positives that that person can take away?
I think what I found is that people sometimes relate what level of the severeness they think they're at and what they perceive other people to be at. And to me, I say to people, well, irrespective of how the trauma happened, we all share this same trauma of going through what is to each individual of us the most horrific thing they can imagine anyone going through. And I say to them that the positive for me is that I found that I've always been a kind of strong human being in the sense that I was very set in my ways. I had my rules, my regulations, and I stuck to them. And I've not changed that way, and I've always been about trying to be, as I say, that try and be the best possible version of you can be at all times, sort of a thing. And but what I found is that, and I meant it when I said to people, hey, you're not alone, even though you think you are. You don't know how strong you are until it's all you've got. And I said that to myself on the 4th of April. You're going to have to be really strong about this if you want to try and deal with this the way you think it should be dealt with. Yeah, the easy thing to do would be going to the corner and feel sorry for myself. And I do that, believe me. I do it regular occasions. But that doesn't work for me because I've always been the way I am. You do something, you cross a line, and you have to be taken to task. And proper justice has to be, morally. You have to acknowledge what you've done to people like me. I say it as a joke. You've done two things wrong here. You pissed off a Scotsman, and you pissed off a Scottish scaffolder.
Yeah.
And, there's an element of jest in that, but in essence, but that's what you've done. You've woke a fire up in me. I was happy just being who I was, and you took that away from me and you think you can walk away. And part of it drives me on, I suppose, now is, in all honesty, given that I know that I really shouldn't be here, I suppose it is, I can't come into your darkness and guide you out of it. So I know that you can't come into my darkness and guide me out of it. People can be there to try and give you matches and wee hints, but ultimately, the only person that's going to find you out is you. And I would like people to know that, or people to see that I'm not any special human being. We're all the same. This is my part of how to try to deal with calling out the government, trying to do it publicly, because I do feel that had I not made it, I'd really like somebody like me to fight for me, to remember. And I take that very, that goes to a deep level. That's kind of sometimes what I think. If nothing else, I would want people to think, you know, he fought for me, he fought for those that don't have a voice because he shouldn't. That pushes me forward so many times.
That's
What would
amazing.
it,
That's
you
amazing. I
know,
mean, it's like your story is definitely inspiring, and like I think so many people listening to this, it's so important that your story is heard because there'll be so many people who will be listening to this, and I'm sure will take a lot of inspiration from everything you've said. I'm conscious of time, so we have like a closing ritual on the show, which is essentially I ask the guests for a unpopular opinion that you have that you think should be popular. So it can be anything that we've discussed in the last hour. It can be something completely trivial and different, but essentially, what's an unpopular opinion that Alex Mitchell has that he thinks should be popular?
um, there's always like a bit of humour. I'll go for the humour side of it. I think everyone should be forced to learn to do Northern Soul dancing and listen to Northern Soul. Not only would they get fit, because it takes a lot of our fitness, they would thoroughly enjoy it at the same time. And you know what? Dancing's good for the soul.
That's a nice one. I don't think we've had something like that, a dancing one yet. So that's a really nice, I think a nice way to end it as well. So thank you so much for your time, Alex. Keep doing what
Not that I'll be doing much dancing.
keep doing what you're doing in terms of the work you're doing. It's an absolute inspiration. And yeah, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you very much.